Welcome back to this week's video. Today we're going to be discussing the crime wave that swept through California in 1973. This would be courtesy of a man who would later be dubbed the Golden State Killer. Let's get into it. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr.'s parents were not the best sort. They would meet in 1941 and be married. His father was a decorated military veteran that would later die in South Korea, still serving. Joseph Sr. and Kathleen were never too kind to their children. Joseph Sr. was reprimanded more than once by the military police for abusing his wife and children. Kathleen was also reported to have abused the children at least once. It's safe to say that Joseph Jr.'s home life was continually violent. Often, serial killers have things that are petty crimes in their background. When a criminal background check is run by the police department, these crimes would disqualify them from the job. This was not so with Joseph Jr. He seemed to be the perfect candidate. He had military training, a policing degree, and he was cleared on his background check. This would enable him to gain access to the Exeter Police Department. Shortly after this, he met a young lady named Bonnie Caldwell. She would be the reason for his newfound criminal pastimes. The Visalia Ransacker would survey the place that he was going to burglarize prior to that, always ensuring that he had a way in and a way out. He generally only burglarized homes that were one story, and he preferred to go to homes that were in the process of being bought or sold. He was also known for taking orange juice out of the refrigerator and pouring it on the clothes in the closet. He also would use spray cans or plates or cups as a rudimentary alarm system, setting them on doorknobs and windowsills, and always made sure he had 2 exits in the home so that when the plate fell off and broke upon entry, he could quickly escape on the other side. This neighborhood annoyance would not stay that way, and things would eventually escalate. One man noticed that he had shoe prints in his garden, and his daughter reported that a peeping incident had occurred, that when she had looked out her window, she had seen a man with a flashlight staring at her. They started to set up police barriers in the area to try and predict the neighborhoods that he would frequent, and, in turn, catch him. This would be a hard sell, though, considering Joseph was on the burglary unit of the Exeter Police Department. He knew where they were going to be, when they were going to be there, and who was going to be there. And when they would set up in one area of the city, he would simply go to the other side. This would change one night when he decided that he would enter the Snelling household.
I went to bed like any other night without a care in the world. A few hours later, my world was turned upside down.
He began dragging the hysterically crying girl through the house and out through the garage. This would be where her father, Claude, would find them.
DeAngelo had dragged me out of the house, out the back door, and through the gate that separated our backyard from the carport and driveway, all the while having a gun pointed at my head. When we were under the carport, I heard my dad yell something and saw him pause in the kitchen just for a moment before he charged out of the house through the back door near us. DeAngelo fired 2 shots, hitting my dad.
He almost shot the girl as well, but at the last moment, kicked her in the face and fled. Claude would die of his injuries. This significantly escalated the ransacker's crimes from burglary to murder, and the police began an even more strenuous set of stakeouts. And 2 cops would be successful. Officer McGowan and his partner were staking out a home in the area. McGowan was in the home and his partner was in the car parked across the street. While McGowan was sitting in the garage, he heard someone begin fiddling with the locks. When Joseph opened the garage and noticed McGowan, and he ran around in the backyard, the officer eventually screamed halt and fired into the ground, a warning shot. Joseph stopped, he held up his right hand, and then he discreetly reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out a gun. The officer knew he had made a mistake. Joseph fired at him. The shot hit the officer's flashlight, sparing his life, but the scene immediately went dark, and Joseph escaped into the night. Initially, he would only invade homes that had women alone in them, then women and children, and finally graduating to when couples were together. Some victims that are commonly forgotten are the men that watch their girlfriends and wives be raped. Victor Hayes is one of these men. In his report, he stated, the East Area Rapist, that the ear, Joseph, came into his room, made his girlfriend bind him, and then pulled her into the living room.
Something was said to the effect, "Don't move or I'll kill you." He had some like shoelaces in his pocket, and he instructed her to tie my hands. So now he's been back, he's made 2 trips into my room. And whatever else he's doing in the other part of the house, he's raping her. I hear some whimpering. I'm fucking 21 years old. That's my fucking girlfriend out there. This whole thing has been going on for 25 or 30 minutes, okay?
These mind games and the frequent attacks, sometimes in the same 24-hour period, had the townsfolk sick with worry. And people began cutting down their expensive landscaping, just so the ear would have nowhere to hide around their homes. But Joseph was closer than they thought. Since he was on the Auburn Police Department, some of his duties when he was sent out would be to interview victims of his own crimes. Joseph would grow more and more confident and more bold with each crime that he committed. But this would not come without close calls. At this time, the East Area Rapist was not connected to the Visalia Ransacker. But this would change. With each new crime, they were building a better and better profile, and they already had several sketches available of the attacker. The most troubling portion to the police was that someone had suggested he was part of the police department itself, a fact that would later turn out to be true. One of the detectives on the ear case would come into contact with someone from the Visalia Ransacker case. When they compared notes, they realized that both of their men enjoyed taking trinkets that were not valuable. They had the same alarm system, they had the same 2-exit strategy, and they liked to stake out or break into the homes prior to their actual crimes. All of these details pointed to the same man. When Joseph was fired, he and his wife moved to Southern California, and now he had a taste for blood. Less than a week later, just 2 houses down the street, a man and a woman were caught by what would later be called the original Nightstalker, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. once again. The man broke into the home, ordered the woman to tie her boyfriend. Then he took her into the living room, put a blanket over the TV, and tied her as well. Then he made a mistake. He went into the kitchen and started looking for something, whispering, "I'll kill him." But the woman's bonds had not been tied enough. She struggled free and ran out the door screaming. Her boyfriend hopped into the backyard and rolled under a tree, which was the only thing that saved him from Joseph's roving flashlight beam. They would be the last people to live to give a description of Joseph. He was briefly named the Diamond Knot Killer from this crime because of the knot that he used to bind Charlene. It would later be revealed that this was a knot that the ear had used previously. Thus, this was our first link between the original Nightstalker and the East Area Rapist. Interestingly, this was due to the changing of the DNA evidence collection system. Eli and Patty Harrington's family, who were the victims of his last murder, would donate $2 million to a California bill that would mandate the collection of DNA from criminals, convicts, and felons. This would partially be his undoing. A 5-year gap would allow Joseph's life to change. He had a child born in 1981. Then his wife was admitted to the California State Bar and began practicing as a divorce attorney. They would later separate in 1991, but these things were not enough for Joseph. He had a taste for blood, and eventually it was going to show itself one more time. This would be when he met a troubled young girl named Janelle Cruz. The police would originally not connect this case with the original Nightstalker, as such a long time period had passed in a case that was rather frequent. Janelle had many suitors, and the police looked at each of them one by one, gradually eliminating each one. One even confessed to the murder, but was later found to have not been in the right place at the right time to have even attempted to commit the crime. This would leave Janelle Cruz's murder unsolved. DNA was collected from this crime scene and would be the final straw in Joseph's coffin. He and his wife would not get divorced until 2018. This is not considered to be uncommon, and usually there needs to be some sort of catalyst for a divorce in such a long separation. And finding out your husband is a serial killer is probably enough of a catalyst for that. Paul Holes would begin investigating this case in 1994. The Ear had only raped people, and the Visalia Ransacker had one murder. Well, the statute of limitations on burglary and rape had ran out at this time, so this box had been slated for destruction. But for some reason, the police station just kept it around. This was very fortunate because when Paul Holes became curious, he was able to open up the Ear files and extract the DNA from them, send them off, and with the new technology that was available to the police force, he was able to take that DNA and match it to the original Nightstalker. This ended up positively connecting all 3 pseudonyms together to form what Michelle McNamara would later dub the Golden State Killer. Adding these murders to this case meant that the evidence that had been collected was no longer obsolete. If they could find him, he could still be tried for his crimes. A few days after the news story had ran about the connection between the 3 cases, a woman in the suburbs received a phone call, and when she picked it up, she heard the man's voice on the other end say, "Remember when we played?" This meant that the Golden State Killer was still alive and he could still be caught. Paul Holes set about using forensic genealogy to connect people together and build family trees. They had never been able to find this killer's DNA in the criminal justice system, so they hoped to use public DNA sites to do this. They formed a profile and uploaded it to Ancestry and GED Match, coming down to only Joseph James DeAngelo. The police surveyed his home and found him living in Citrus Heights, California, very close to the areas that he had plagued. They followed him and collected discarded DNA and were able to get a positive match to the Golden State Killer. Paul Holes says the thing that he will remember most about the arrest is the way that his apartment had every screen covered with some sort of blanket or towel, just like in all of his other crime scenes. Joseph, for his part, when he was arrested, said, "I did all those things. I destroyed their lives." He appeared in court as a feeble old man in a wheelchair, having someone push him and lolling his head back and forth, and generally acting confused. And now, Joseph is right where he belongs, in prison. Kind of amazing that someone was able to commit all these crimes and get away with it for so long. 120 burglaries, 50 rapes, and 13 plus murders. And they would finally catch him over 40 years later. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.
How do you plead?
Guilty.